One of the unlikely partnerships that's been brought to the fore in the last few weeks of this war in Ukraine has been the cooperation between Russia and Iran. The Iranian-made drones, which Russia has used this past week to bomb Kiev as well as other cities, was the most emphatic proof yet that Tehran has become an increasingly close ally to the Kremlin. It is offering both weapons as well as international support, both of which Russia badly needs. There is no deep love between Russia and Iran, at least not yet. One is a newly minted pariah state after attacking another sovereign country, and the other, for decades, has been one of the most isolated countries on the planet. But the two authoritarian governments, both chafing under Western sanctions, share a common worldview. They both see the United States as their primary enemy, and both are threatened by Western-imposed rules-based order which currently exists. This is by and large a partnership of convenience between two embattled dictators. Both countries are deep in crisis, they're struggling economically as well as politically. Iran, remember, is trying its best to quell the street protests that we're seeing after the death of a young woman who refused to wear the hijab. Russia, on the other hand, is trying desperately to win a war which it thought could be wrapped up in weeks. So much so, an unpopular military draft had to be announced last month, after which there were videos of young men fleeing the country. So on Crux Decode, how should the world see this new partnership between Iran and Russia? Is it just a military partnership limited to this current war, or is there a larger strategic alliance building up? The emergence of a Moscow-Tehran alliance has multiple international implications. The biggest one being that it puts in cold storage any possibility of a new nuclear deal between Iran and the world's leading powers. It will also raise pressure on other actors in the Middle East, namely Israel, which of course is sworn enemies with Iran, and Saudi Arabia, which has its own geopolitical equations with Iran. These two countries, principal and primary actors in the Middle East, will be forced to take sides in the Ukraine war in a way that they did not have to do up until now. The relationship between Russia and Iran has been developing for years now. President Vladimir Putin deployed his air force to Syria starting in 2015 to prevent the collapse of the regime of President Bashar al-Assad. Assad has been a long-time ally of Iran. Russia and Iran, in fact, worked in lockstep militarily, with Russian warplanes oftentimes providing cover for Iranian militiamen and proxies who were on the ground fighting on behalf of Assad. After the 1979 revolution in Iran, the country formulated a foreign policy around the slogan, "Neither East nor West." It was equally wary of both the Soviet Union and the United States. Now the Islamic Republic is choosing sides, and images of Iran's exploding drones accurately hitting their targets, it advertises Iran as a regional power that needs to be taken seriously. But both Iran and Russia have denied, at least officially, that these foreign-made drones were involved in the bombings that happened in Kiev and a dozen other cities across Ukraine. But that is not all. It's not just these drones that Iran seemingly is selling to Russia. It is also not stopping Iran from sending drone trainers by the dozen to Russia to try and help Russian troops operate these kamikaze drones. The Iranian trainers are operating from a Russian military base in Crimea, where many of these drones have been based since their delivery. The trainers are from what is called the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or the RGC. It's a branch of the Iranian military which has been designated as a terrorist organization by the United States. The deployment of Iranian trainers appears to coincide with the stepped-up use of drones both in Ukraine as well as in the wider war. It indicates a deeper involvement by Iran in this war. Originally, Russia had sent its personnel to Iran for training on these drones. But as Russia's problems continued on the battlefield, Iran decided to send its trainers to Crimea. The first batch of Iranian weapons was delivered to Russia back in August, even though, like I said, officially both sides deny this claim. Now, this cache of weapons, drones, includes the Shahids. These are single-use drones which are meant to explode the moment they hit a target. But they have a range of over 1,000 miles, so which basically means they can be launched from mainland Russia with targets in Ukraine. Iran, meanwhile, has also sent the larger drones called the Muhajirs. These are used for surveillance. They can also carry up to 4 missiles at a time. Other than striking at civilian populations, these drones have also been used to strike at parts of the electrical power grid across Ukraine. In fact, President Putin appears to be intent on taking down Ukraine's power infrastructure and to plunge the civilian population into darkness even as the winter begins to set in. But experts feel that using these drones on civilian populations and not on military targets for military advantages, that may be seen as an act of desperation. It could end up becoming counterproductive because it shows that Putin is trying very hard to break the Ukrainian people's will to fight. Unfortunately for him, for the Ukrainian people, this is a fight to the finish. This is a fight for their very existence as a nation. Iran, meanwhile, does not want to highlight the weapon sales because popular opinion in Iran would not back that. Ukraine is generally considered to be a slightly more likable country amongst ordinary Iranians than Russia is. Also, if you look at Iran's politics over the last 20-30 years, the Islamic Republic has cast itself as a defender of underdogs in the world. But at the same time, Iran also wants to show the rest of the world that it is a military superpower and it has a big power as an ally, a power to whom it has the capacity of selling modern-day weapons. Aside from weapons, the two countries, Iran and Russia, have also found common ground on energy as well as oil and gas. Russia, for a number of years, has worked on Iran's Bushehr nuclear power plant. For Russia, it's a case of necessity. With increasing US-led sanctions, Russia is finding it extremely difficult to buy weapons from anywhere in the international market. That leaves Russia with very few options. Unable to buy weapons, except perhaps from a North Korea, Moscow has turned to Tehran. For Iran, Russian use of its drones sends out a message not just to the international community, but also to its own domestic audience. Remember, tens of thousands of women and men have been protesting against the restrictions on women's rights as well as personal freedom. The government of Iran is trying desperately to show Iranians that their government is not in a position of weakness and that it has not been cowed down by external pressures. In fact, the Washington Post reported this past week that Iran is considering selling other high-tech weaponry to Russia as well, including short-range ballistic missiles. So it's not just going to be the drones. Iran is also considering selling weapons that are far deadlier than these drones. The interesting question, though, is how may two other important regional players react to this deepening cooperation between Moscow and Tehran? And those two players happen to be Israel. Israel, of course, has sworn enemies with Iran. Yet at the same time, can Israel afford to directly arm Ukraine? That, of course, is an open question. It's also not clear how Saudi Arabia, Iran's primary Muslim adversary in the region, how Saudi Arabia, the kingdom, is going to react to the Kremlin drawing closer to Tehran. The Saudi government and Moscow very recently joined hands to try and raise oil prices by putting a cap on the amount of oil supplies OPEC was producing. Now, that was a move that has not gone down well with the Biden administration in Washington. That, of course, will fuel inflation. Gas prices will go up, not just in the US, but also in Europe. So far, there is no talk of any meeting between the new Saudi ruler Mohammed bin Salman and Vladimir Putin. But with reports of Joe Biden potentially re-evaluating ties with Riyadh, there is a feeling that this traditional American ally that Saudi Arabia has been for a number of years now, it'll inevitably be pushed into Moscow's arms. So this interesting paradigm shift that seems to be happening, brought about by Iran's growing closeness to Moscow, will that change the two big regional powers, Israel and Saudi Arabia, to stop being on the fence on this war and directly get involved on the side of Ukraine, on the side of the NATO forces? That is a question for which it'll be interesting to see how this plays out over the medium to long term.